the difference between univariate and bivariate data? Uni means one, bi means two. So we've been dealing with one variable data, and now we're going to deal with data that talks about the relationship between two variables. So something that we're going to be using when we're analyzing these relationships is plotting the data, looking at patterns, looking at their numerical summaries, as well as the overall patterns. And we're going to do that with scatterplots. So the first thing we're going to talk about is explanatory and response variables. Something that you may have heard before is you may have heard of a response variable being the dependent variable and the explanatory being the independent. However, what's very important is that we don't call this that in statistics. Independent and dependent deals with probability. However, if you're in physics class or if you're graphing things, a best way to think about the difference of them is the difference between an independent and dependent variable. So the response variable is the outcome of a study. The explanatory variable explains why the response variable happened. So the explanatory variable is the things like time. And whatever happens to the height depends on the time. So instead of using independent and dependent, remember we use explanatory and response. Let's do an example. This example here, this example here is in your book, or it looks like the example in your book. So I want you all to make sure you highlight this page number, because let's say if you don't do well in the quiz, or you want to study for the test, and you're like, Miss, I want more examples. I'm going to tell you to go back in your book, because you have examples that look just like this on this page, okay? So, you're going to identify the explanatory variable and response variable for the following relationships and explain your reasoning. So, A, the score on a stats final exam and the number of hours studied for a sample of students. Now, what this question tells me is, can one of these variables explain the other? So the idea is, if you study more for the test, hopefully that means that you do better on it. So that means that the hours should explain your score. Now let's look at B. The final exam for statistics and the final exam for biology. Now this one may be a little different, because you could be doing really well in science, but not in stats class. You could be doing really well in stats, but not in biology. So those two things do not predict each other. So the answer would be neither. Take a moment, read the example. Hear what I said. Take a moment. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so do I have any questions about that portion, class? You feel okay? Okay, let's keep pushing. So let's talk about how would you display the relationship of how many hours you studied versus the score. You can use what's called a scatter plot. So a scatter plot shows the relationship between two quantitative variables. So it's a graph with a lot of dots. And those dots are represented by both your X and your Y values. So in order to make a scatter plot, now heads up, I'm only going to ask you to make a scatter plot every now and then. You don't need to necessarily know how to do it, but to be quite frank, y'all learned how to plot points in like 5th, 6th grade. So it's basically the same thing. You're going to label the axes, scale the axes, plot the points. Now, in order to describe scatter plots, this was a bit more important. In order to describe it, we first want to talk about whether or not it has a positive or negative association. So a positive association means that it trends upward, whereas a negative association means that it trends downward. So if you're in your notes, you have a whole bunch of words, right? The word positive, I'm going to write upwards. I'm going to put a whole bunch of dots that's going up. Negative association, I'm going to write downward. And then I'm going to make a whole bunch of dots. Notice how my dots aren't necessarily straight. They're a little all over the place. But I'm creating a trend. That's really, especially if you have your notes in front of you, write that down. You want to show that a positive association trends upwards, and a negative association trends downwards. Let me see those dots on your notes. I'll give you a second. Make some dots on your notes. If you're not taking notes on your notes, you are not doing notes right. Yes. Once again, make sure that you're able to really go through your notes. And while you're here, I'll just write it down. No association, and you have this in your notes, I believe. There's no pattern. So maybe that. It looks like a blob. And so what you'll notice is some things have a trend. So some things may not be strong, but they're going kind of up. Some things they go straight up in a line. Some scatter plots, maybe they're non-linear. And we're going to talk about those patterns in a moment. I just want to make sure everyone has time to really go over taking notes on their notes. And remember, no association, there's no pattern. So on the next few screens, you're going to see an example of that. But I still want you to get into the habit of writing notes on your notes. That's what we expect from you, literally, next semester. Some of you guys are going to start college in July. Some of you, maybe you'll do summer classes. I don't know. That's your one. You got to be wrong. Some of y'all, you guys are going to start in August. So just remember that. No, this is the last January you're going to be in high school. You're not going to be in school. Welcome. Terrible. Right? So we already talked about no association. Here are a few pictures. Let's take some guesses. I know that that's in your notes, so it doesn't look on your screen. Don't look at your paper, look at the screen. All right, so first one. We have the relationship between payroll and the number of wins. Is it positive, negative, or no association? I am right here. Payroll and number of wins. Is it a positive relationship, a negative relationship, or no relationship? Okay. I hear a few positives. I heard no. Let me zoom in for some of y'all over here. First one is a positive association. Notice how if I take my finger and I kind of just follow the lines, although they're not in a straight line, they're not close together, I can still see that they're trending upwards. Now let's look at the relationship between runs allowed and the number of wins. Is it a positive relationship, a negative relationship, or no relationship? Negative. Yes. And then the next one. The relationship between height and sleep. Okay, positive, negative, or none? None. Okay, awesome. Let's keep it going. So in order to describe a scatter plot, they like to use the word thus. For those that used to watch, what's that place called? The thing called? The Simpsons. You can use the Simpsons to help you out. Now me, I wasn't raised on having good culture, so I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay? But feel free to use thus if that helps out. You need to know the direction, the form, the strength, and unusual features. Sorry, I don't know what happened to my box. Okay, so please feel free to write thus if that will help you. You need a direction. Is it positive? Is it negative? Or is it none? The form. I'm going to circle it, so make sure you highlight or circle these parts. We want to know whether it's linear or non-linear. Is it a straight line? Kind of. Or does it have a little curve to it? Does it have a little twang? We want to know whether a scatter plot is weak, moderate, or strong. For those who are asking, you can use the word moderately. So for instance, you could say something is moderately strong. And remember the word moderately means kind of. It's kind of strong. It's moderately strong. You can also say something is moderately weak. Okay? If you want to describe the Cowboys, if you will. Moderately weak, you know? They're not terrible, you know? They're not the Lions. They're the Cowboys. I said what I said. And you want to talk about my Ravens, though. You can consider them moderately strong. Not the best season that you play. Right? And lastly, unusual features. Notice how we did not say the word outlier. Unusual feature. We're looking for individual points. And we're also looking for distinct clusters. So it could be unusual for a certain point, or it could be there's a group of points somewhere totally different than where we wanted them to be. Okay? That's thus. All right, now we just have a few more examples. We have 3 more examples, and then we are done. We are good. Okay? Let's see some people writing from away for you real quick. Here's what's very important. Whenever you're talking about a scatter plot, write it in context. Do not just start talking. Tell me what you're talking about. Okay? So you really want to make sure that it all falls within context. So look at this scatter plot here. This scatter plot shows the association between the mean SAT score and the percent of students who take the SAT for 50 U.S. states. Describe the association in the scatter plot. Right? So I want you guys to look at this one here. Here is what gave us. It is moderately strong. Okay, so it's not the strongest, but it's high. That's the strength. It is negative. That's your direction. It is curved. It's so curved. I'm sorry for these boxes. Curved is non-linear. So essentially in terms of form, is it a line or is it not a line? And lastly, relationship between the percent of students in a state who take the SAT and the mean SAT score. There are two distinct clusters and two unusual points. So I have two clusters. And I also have, so I'm going to name this clusters. Feel free to use the colors that you have at your table. But I also have some unusual points. If I follow, these here are kind of outside of the direction that everyone else is going in. So if I highlight it, everyone's going like this. Notice how those 2 points don't follow that pattern. So we consider those to be unusual points. Okay, so take a moment. So do we have any questions about that one? Yes, sir. Yeah. There you go up. Take it press it. Close mouth, don't get finished. And then we're gonna, I'll wait for you, okay? I want you to take a moment. If you go to your next page, you have your notes. I'm waiting for someone who needs to copy this down. I want you to look at the next example. See if you can hide the answers. And I want you to see if you can answer the next example on your own. Tell me the strength. Is it strong? Like the 49ers? Is it moderate? Like the Ravens? Or is it weak? Like the Lions? That's what I call running ball. Miami State. Who answered it? Smart. Miami Dolphins, not smart. No, not at all. See if you can hide the answer. See what that info might be. So this next scatter plot shows the relationship between years since 1990 and the 100-meter record time in seconds for the years 1983 to 2010. So let's look at it, y'all. Let's start off with let's start off with direction. Is it positive or negative? Okay, has a negative trend. What would you say about does it have any unusual features? Yeah, okay, there's a point. Does anyone see any clusters that they care about? No? Okay. S, the form, is it linear or non-linear? Take a second to think. And lastly, the strength, strong, moderate, weak, moderately weak, moderately strong. Take a second to think. Let's see. It's fairly strong, moderately strong, negative, and it's actually considered linear. Between the years since 1900 and the 100-meter sprint, and if you can take a wild guess, this person who ran way too fast, that's Usain Bolt. That's why he's so popular, because he's unusual. One thing that I want you to notice is I want you to notice how 3 parts of the duck is in one sentence. So when you write this, you do not have to give me 4 sentences. You can literally write the strength, the direction, and the form all in one sentence. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Be strategic. Last one, y'all. Last one. So once again, you can always use this form to help you. So you can write this in 2 sentences. You can give me the strength, direction, and form with context. Give me context. I'm gonna write that. Give me context. If you do not give me context, I'm gonna make up my own context. And if I make up my own context, I'm gonna mark you wrong. Consider that as payment for making up my own context. Okay? So always tell me what you are describing. And then lastly, I put the unusual features in its own little way. All right, so we have one more left, and then we'll have some fun. Lastly, we have a scatter plot that shows the relationship between the year and the world record time for marathon in hours. Take a second. You don't have to say it out loud, but I want you to think about it. What is the strength? Let's do strength first. Strength. Is it strong, weak, moderate, moderately strong, moderately weak? Let's look at the direction. Is it positive or negative? Look at the form. Is it linear or non-linear? You don't have to tell me if it's exponential, quadratic, none of that. No. That's for Mr. Lee's class. That's their problem. Us, is it aligned or is it not aligned? And lastly, do you have any unusual features or clusters? Do it. There is a strong, negative, non-linear relationship between the years since 1900 and the world record marathon time. There are no obvious unusual points. So notice that if they were no unusual points, we still state that. So state there are no unusual points. So what I will not accept is, oh, well, miss, there wasn't any points. So I didn't see that there were any. I'm like, great. So I assume that there were, so I marked you wrong. If you give me any space to assume, I will always assume incorrectly. So be careful. I will make up my own stories, and I have a great imagination. It is awesome. 10 out of 10 recommend. So just keep that in mind, okay? So, class, with that, I have to say, we are done. Hey, so here's your summary. Today, we learned how to distinguish between explanatory and response variables. We will practice making a scatter plot, and we have described the direction, form, and strength of a relationship while identifying unusual features. Yay! All right, now for those that are with me, we're going to take a moment so I can set up for the items that you'll need for your bungee jumping. And I